there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York. It's a phenomenon that is unheard of in modern American life. A disgraced one-term ex-president solidifying his grip on one of the country's two major political parties. New developments and a wave of fresh reporting highlight how the ex-president and his allies have seized near full control of the American right. The Washington Post reports that a so-called MAGA squad of Trump loyalists, folks like Congressman Matt Gaetz, who's ensnared in an alleged child sex trafficking investigation, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, have seized the spotlight within the House GOP and are leading a push to purge their party of lawmakers who dare to try to get things done for their constituents by working with Democrats on things that used to be uncontroversial, things like infrastructure, or those who acknowledge the truth, the reality of January 6th, that the ex-president and his allies used the big lie that the election was stolen to incite a deadly insurrection. From that new Washington Post reporting, quote, this MAGA squad has rocketed to fame, especially on the political right, with massive social media followings, frequent appearances on pro-Trump media, and growing fundraising networks that get a boost with every provocative tweet or TV hit. Most of all, they enjoy support from the former president, the most popular figure in the Republican Party, who praises them at rallies and echoes their incendiary rhetoric. They have gained strength with the acquiescence of House GOP leaders who have either backed their positions or remained mostly silent when others in the party have raised objections to their approach. None of this, none of it, would be happening without right-wing media, whose biggest stars are fully committed to feeding millions of Americans a steady diet of pro-Trump garbage and disinformation. A recent series by Tucker Carlson that suggests, contrary to any and all evidence available, that January 6th was a false flag and that portrays the insurrectionists as victims, led to the resignation of two prominent conservatives from Fox News in protests. New York Times is reporting today that Stephen Hayes and Jonah Goldberg, quote, find themselves in a group of Americans who think the threat that Trump poses to America's democratic system outweighs many other political differences. Hayes said that he was particularly concerned about Fox lending support to the idea, quote, that there's a domestic war on terror and it's coming for half of the country, he said. That is not true. In a piece in the Dispatch, a site which Goldberg and Hayes founded, they call out Fox News for years of peddling disinformation in service of Donald Trump, adding that the Tucker Carlson special painting an alternate reality of the Capitol attack is, quote, a collection of incoherent conspiracy-mongering riddled with factual inaccuracies, half-truths, deceptive imagery, and damning omissions. And its message is clear. The U.S. government is targeting patriotic Americans in the same manner and with the same tools that it used to target al-Qaeda. This is not happening, and we think it's dangerous to pretend it is. If a person with such a platform shares such misinformation loud enough and long enough, there are Americans who will believe and act upon it. This is not theoretical. This is what actually happened on January 6, 2021. The relentless Trumpification of the American right is where we start this hour. Jackie Alamany, congressional correspondent with the Washington Post, whose reporting we just read from, joins us. Also with us today, former Republican strategist Steve Schmidt's here. MSNBC contributor Jason Johnson, politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University and host of the podcast A Word with Jason Johnson, joins us. And MSNBC political analyst, the former Senator Claire McCaskill's here. Jackie, this is your reporting. I'm going to ask you to take me inside of it.
Yeah, Nicole, thanks so much for having me on to talk about it. We sort of touched on it on Friday, although from that perspective, we were looking more at Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy's bid to cement his speakership for next year in the case that House GOP does take back the majority. But, you know, in the meantime, this MAGA squad, which is the far right corner of the House Freedom Caucus, people like Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Paul Gosar, Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert, Madison Cawthorn. These are the biggest and loudest voices in the House GOP conference. They are the people who amplify a lot of Trump's disinformation. They amplify disinformation of their own, along with anti-Semitic and racist memes and conspiracy theories. They have, at least in the past. And two of them have actual actually been successfully censored by Democrats and kicked off of their committees. Instead of these people being disowned by the party or sued, reprimanded in some way, they've actually been embraced and celebrated by the de facto leader of the Republican Party himself, former President Trump, and thusly they've been supported and continue to be supported by Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. That number 218 is on his mind. Which is that he wants as much support as possible in the case that the minority does become the majority so that he can ultimately become speaker. In the meantime, though, if he continues to not be able to appease some of these more extremist right-wingers, you're going to continue to see blowback like you did last week, which is Marjorie Taylor Greene. Again, while she might not be representative of the House GOP conference, she is one of the loudest voices, and she was not happy with the minority leader and criticized him for declining to punish the 13 Republicans who voted in favor of the bipartisan infrastructure package.
It's just unbelievable. Steve Schmidt, you tweeted this. A tide of extremism has risen from the ashes of a failed American coup. What strikes me is how much more extreme our broken politics has gotten since the Trump coup. And there is an absolute black hole of nothingness, where there should be a focus and a passion around defending American democracy and a birthright of freedom that remains the envy of people all over the world.
Yeah, look, Nicole, good afternoon. Everything that Jackie just said there is startling to hear, of course, but we know it already. This has been so for a long time. These people that she mentioned, from Paul Gosar, who has raised money with a Holocaust denier, who has aligned himself with white nationalists and white supremacists, no hyperbole at all involved, just factually, who's ideated about the murder of a congresswoman, Matt Gaetz, all the rest of them. They're loony, they're crazy. Lauren Boebert, 6, 7 different arrests on her criminal jacket. These political extremists are in charge of the Republican Party. We've known that. We are seeing a Republican Party continue to metastasize. The autocratic moment is evolving. The threat is deepening, and they are poised to take power in the midterms in 2022. Kevin McCarthy, I think, will have a real hard time being speaker. He failed at it before. But the people you just mentioned are going to drive the message of the Republican Party. It's an opportunity for Democrats to run against, to campaign against. And when we talk about all of this, I'm just reminded by this Winston Churchill quote, trying to explain the Second World War. And what he said was the malice of the wicked was aided by the weakness of the virtuous. And you have this collection of people that have pretended this isn't happening, turned away from it, continue to pretend it's not happening. But all the while, the temperature rises in America with regard to this moment of extremism.
And one of the most alarming aspects of this is attempts to launder what they all know is BS. And Steve, I want to show you Ted Cruz's performance, because that's what it was, performative punditry on CBS.
I had many conversations with him in days and weeks and months leading up to January 6th. I talked to the president sometimes as often as once a week or once a day. But my point is simple. Under the Constitution, Congress has a role and has a responsibility when it comes to certifying votes. You look at 1876 and the election of 1876, there was a contested election. There were serious allegations of election fraud. And what Congress did in 1876 is it appointed an electoral commission.
Right, but
it consisted of 5 members of the Senate, 5 members of the House, 5 Supreme Court justices.
That what you're laying out as an intellectualized argument here is not what people gathered and chanting things like Mike Pence were talking about. You know that.
Look, I think the violence that happened on that day was horrific. Okay. Democrats and a lot of the press decided to just engage in incendiary rhetoric rather than acknowledge voter fraud is real. It is a problem.
Well, do you have...
And the allegations of voter fraud needed to be examined on the merits.
Okay, Senator, there is no evidence of fraud that would have really drawn the outcome of the election into doubt. You know that.
So, Steve, a lot of problems with that, and I'll leave conversations about platforming Ted Cruz to others, but there were allegations of election fraud. No, there weren't. I mean, Bill Barr was the Attorney General, for Christ's sake, and Chris Krebs, a lifelong Republican, was in charge of election integrity, and Rudy Giuliani took his allegations of fraud to dozens of courts, and there wasn't any. So why is this person, Ted Cruz, still on TV saying that?
Well, this is a historically despicable person, Nicole. He ranks right up there with Joe McCarthy. He's a demagogue. He's a liar. He is as irresponsible a United States senator as there has ever been in the history of the United States. He arrived in the Senate and has been a vandal towards our institutions and towards the idea of the truth and delivering it to the American people. So again, it's all nonsense that he's spouting out of his mouth. Again, we have a real-life autocratic movement in this country. Two elements in order to sustain one are the cynicism of its elites. Men like Ted Cruz, who've had every advantage, every opportunity, graduate of the most elite institutions in the country like Harvard Law School, who believe they can ride the Trump tiger, that they can play its supporters for fools, that they can benefit and accrete power to themselves. So when you look at somebody like Ted Cruz, you know he's lying. Everybody knows he's lying. Ted Cruz knows he's lying. But extraordinary cynicism coupled with the type of propaganda and that comes out of Fox News and the right wing can turn that nonsense into reality. And so Ted Cruz helped incite the January 6 attacks with his lying. With his instigations. He was, of course, revving up the crowd there that morning, and he has sought to whitewash it with more lying for many, many months. He is a truly despicable figure at a moment of real crisis. History will judge him very, very harshly should American democracy prevail in the years of fight that lie ahead between this extremist movement that is gaining strength, not decreasing in strength.
Claire, I want to turn to the reporting in the New York Times about the resignation of two. I mean, for all of my time and Steve Schmidt's time in American politics, these two gentlemen were important and influential. And it's good that they left. It's good to have a line. But I want to show you what didn't cross the line for them.
America's most dangerous insurrectionists aren't the goofy QAnon people in fur and face paint. Okay, the real threat to our future is Biden and the well-heeled, powerful forces who want us to lose sight of what made America great in the first place. No reasonable person thinks that what happened on January 6th was, as Biden said, the worst attack on the Capitol since the Civil War.
The ringleaders of the riots go free, especially if they're working for the FBI, but the people who offend Joe Biden's friends, they're in jail.
So, again, I welcome anyone to the cause of deciding that democracy matters more than right-left divides in this country. But it's a curious line to draw, I guess. There was a lot of really dangerous, really bad disinformation, even before that heinous Tucker Carlson docudrama.
You know, what's really changed, Nicole, is there has always been a degree of dishonesty in order for people to get the power they want. For Fox News, it's to try to get viewers. For Ted Cruz, it's to try to get power. And really, they are so much worse. The Tucker Carlsons and the Ted Cruzes of the world, as Steve just said, they are so much worse than the QAnon lady. I think that QAnon lady might really believe this stuff. I think she may be, maybe a little dim. And actually think this stuff is true. But Tucker Carlson knows it's not true. As Steve said, Ted Cruz knows none of this is true. And let's take a walk down memory lane. Let's look at how bold this irresponsibility is. Does anybody remember what Cruz was doing at the end of the Republican primaries in 2016? I remember he was calling out Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And he even went so far to take it all the way to the convention when he was met with a rain of boos as the brilliant politician Ted Cruz decided this was the moment for him to take his stand against Donald Trump. And now he is a shriveled up mere shadow of the guy that was on that podium at the Republican National Convention. He is so desperate to be relevant. He will sacrifice everything to do it. And by the way, Kevin McCarthy's the same way. And Mitch McConnell is the same way. And so are another host of Republican leaders that have not just allowed the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Boeberts and the crazy Gozars to take over. They have given them their power willingly. And that is astounding.
It's astounding and it's dangerous. And Jason, you and I have had this conversation, I think going back to the earliest days of the Biden administration about why this matters. And at a time when the Department of Homeland Security and law enforcement agencies have issued bulletin after bulletin after bulletin, explaining to local police departments and the public that the gravest threat to the homeland is domestic violent extremism. And that the biggest bucket within that greatest threat is white supremacy and its grievances over COVID and the lies about the election. So why this matters is because the beating heart of the Republican Party, of the American right, is now right in line with the gravest terror threat to the homeland.
Yeah, Nicole, and here's the thing. Remember, part of this sort of collection of zany, crazy people, as people refer to them, remember they were fighting over each other on Twitter last Friday to offer internships to Kyle Rittenhouse. Like, that's where we are, right? Like, they're not just sort of offering lip service and red meat to terrorists. They're actually going after people who just slipped by being convicted of shooting 3 folks and saying, you'd make a great intern. That's the issue. But here's the larger thing, Nicole. None of this is new, right? Like, these people were always this way. Ted Cruz has always been a grown-up adult Texas version of Stacey Flick, a little weasel who desperately wants power. Jim Jordan has always been someone who can find conspiracy theories everywhere except apparently in his own locker room. Lauren Boebert, Marley Taylor Jr., all of them. We know who they are. So the question isn't that they're terrible people. The question is, what does an administration who sees this kind of behavior, what does Nancy Pelosi, what does Joe Biden, what does Merrick Garland do? And I have been pointing out for months now, Congress is now a hostile workplace, right? And a hostile workplace that wouldn't be accepted at any of our jobs we've ever had. You can't have people going into the building every day threatening other people who work there. You can't have people going into the building every day bringing in other people who are threatening your coworkers. These are the kinds of things that Nancy Pelosi should be talking to the Department of Justice about. Hey, can we bring in some rules here? We had one issue with masks, but these guys are threatening each other online then walking into the building. We need to do something about that. We need to be going further with Department of Justice investigations because you can't tell me that none of these people or their staffs were involved in January 6th. Somebody here is guilty, and we know it. If there was some actual effort to rain down consequences on some of this crazy behavior, we might see people backing off. But the problem is, all that we end up doing is saying, oh my gosh, these guys are terrible, but those in a position to hold them accountable have thus far not done so. And that encourages the next Madison Cawthorn, the next Bob Roberts kind of character to come out of the woodwork and do something even more extreme next year to get himself into a gerrymandered office after the midterms.
You know, Jackie, I think I've asked you this before, but what was Steve Scalise's posture around the dissemination of a video depicting violence toward another member, having been a victim of political violence himself?
Nicole, actually, I tried to go ask him that after you asked me on your show, and I said I hadn't. I'm sorry, and I hadn't yet had the opportunity to ask him that. But I actually want to get back to a point that Claire made about when you suggested, Claire, that some of these people might be dim for buying into some of these conspiracy theories and the fraudulent lies. And look, I'm not a defender of the insurrectionists by any means, but I think it is an opportunity to call out the perpetrators of these lies. People like Kayleigh McEnany to Ted Cruz, people who graduated from Harvard Law and the most elite institutions in the United States, who have been amplifying and repeating all of this disinformation, all of these conspiracy theories for the purpose of political expediency. The lawyer for Jacob Chansley, the guy who was sentenced last week, who was known as the QAnon shaman, and his lawyer had a message, and he said that the message here was for his client, who actually ended up being fairly repentant for some of his actions, said that Donald Trump needed to take care of the jackasses that he effed up on January 6th. And I think this is a really important message that we all need to repeat over and over again. Yes, maybe some of these people might be dim, but they're also being spoon-fed these lies by people that they are supposed to respect and trust, the leaders of their party, a major political party, who have all of the platforms in the world to perpetuate these lies. And I just don't think we should, yes, obviously it is incumbent on the perpetrators who ultimately breached the Capitol, but we do need to call out the root and the rot of the problem here.
Well, I mean, that might be, that's the most important point, and that is why Fox News matters. That's why we cover it here. And Claire, I want to give you a chance to respond, and I'm sure you're saying something more along the same lines as one another than divergent, but this is the whole point. Of course, Kayleigh McEnany and Ted Cruz know that if there were fraud, Bill Barr would have found it. Bill Barr repelled career prosecutors from the Department of Justice with his meddling in the cases of Trump's campaign crew. Bill Barr, I think, busted norms before the election by saying he would investigate fraud. Bill Barr sort of platformed Donald Trump's conspiracy theories about election fraud on CNN ahead of the election. That guy couldn't find any. Had to give an interview to AP to get it out there in hopes that the guy at the White House would hear it or see it. Chris Krebs was in charge of the elections, lifelong Republican, couldn't find any fraud because there wasn't any. So, Claire, to Jackie's point about Kayleigh McEnany, who's very well educated, and Ted Cruz and these others, and that really virulent strain of disinformation echo and amplification on Fox News, how do Democrats counter that?
Well, first of all, I agree totally. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene and the other dimwits are not really the truly bad guys here. The bad guys here are the people who know better and who, in an effort, as I said, Ted Cruz, in an effort just to get power, just to be at the center of attention, whether it's Lindsey Graham or Ted Cruz or the people that have high education at Fox News that are doing this. And where is Bill Barr? I mean, what kind of hell is he living in right now? Why isn't he speaking out? Why has he been allowed to go radio silent after he quit because he saw what was coming? He saw what was coming, Nicole. He resigned because he realized that Trump was going to do the unthinkable. He was going to try to steal the election. And so he quit. But he just put his tail between his legs and slinked off somewhere, never to be seen or heard from again. What kind of legacy is that for a man who had served honorably in government? I mean, when I say honorably, I disagreed with him, but he'd certainly been around a long time. Those of us on the Hill thought he was, quote unquote, normal. We didn't realize there was a new normal. We didn't realize that normal was gone, that Mitch McConnell and all of them, whether it's Josh Hawley, Mitch McConnell, Steve Scalise, they all are in the tank for lies in the name of getting and holding power.
I hope Bill Barr saw Claire McCaskill's message for him. Jackie Alamany, thank you for your reporting and for starting us off talking about it.